It says we are live right now.
Okay, yeah. So it says we're live on my side as well. And you still can't see me, you say?
No, I don't
All
know
right.
what.
Okay, don't worry about that. 2 seconds. Let's see. I just want to go on this other PF page
Yeah, but
quickly.
yeah.
Muvuti, is it live on the Zana PF page?
Should I again?
I just want to see if it's, yeah. So we're live on the Zana PF page. I'm now going to share the link with you. Send in Messenger. So Kangela, your private message. I've just sent you the link.
So I must go out now and go to my messenger and come back here.
Yeah, and then share the link on your main wing. Yeah, on your main page, sorry.
Okay, sure.
All right. But Zamwenza, while you are just okay, anyway, good evening, folks, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Youth League Zone. Tonight, I have the honor of speaking to Andile Mngxitama, who is an activist. I will do a formal introduction. What we're quickly doing is we're dealing with the technical thing, whereby he is to send his link onto his personal profile, and then we start the conversation. Anyway, while we wait, I'd like to thank everyone who is joining us. 2 seconds. Do bear with me. You bear with me. Hey, darling. No, I'm doing a Facebook Live interview. I won't be too long. Um, okay. Thank you to everyone who's just joining us. We're just waiting for Andile Mngxitama to share the link on his personal page. And once that's done, we'll be able to crack on. Okay. Right. Quickly getting that done. But in the meantime, well, we could talk about the many issues that are happening in Zim while we wait for Andile. So, in the last, I think the last week, we've had quite an eventful week in the sense that we had a Heroes celebration in Coventry, held in Coventry in the UK here, and we had a bit of a protest as well, and a protest that apparently has gone live, viral, where we were speaking to people, like Anachinyanga, usual suspects, and we tried to engage them to understand, to ascertain what their issues were, and in so doing, I think we've opened up an opportunity for conversation to extend the aspect of dialogue, as it were, and I think it's something that is improving. It's yet to be seen, how it evolves. There is this typical sense of very toxified political environment within our country, but more so within the diaspora, as it relates to the perception of ZANU-PF and opposition politics as well. And I suppose this is what's critical. So yeah, Mngxitama has shared the link, so he's just going to come back on and we're going to crack on. But yeah, so that was one of the issues that we had. What else was interesting that happened over the week? We had the issue of Gonyet's situation, the comedian who was allegedly abducted and was assaulted, and the assailants claim to have been government agents. And there's been quite a lot of debate about what the incentive would be on the part of the party as well as government. So that's been an interesting debate to follow. And then we've had, what else have we had? We've had the discussion around the interference from those within the diplomatic community, in particular the US, with our domestic politics, and quite a lot of articles have been published in accordance to that. So today, what is the objective? Today, our objective is to really talk to someone from the SADC region. Also, another thing that was very interesting, which leads to this very conversation, is the declaration by the SADC, by SADC rather, that there will be an anti-sanctions day. And so there's now a joint effort to lobby the United States to remove its sanctions. So that's going to be quite an interesting thing to watch. And part of us talking to people like Andile Mngxitama, who are academics, but equally activists within South Africa, but equally with a geopolitical understanding, is to see what the impact of that would be on our domestic politics, but equally on the regional bloc, and how the regional bloc collectively could influence, if indeed there is efficacy with what the regional bloc is proposing to do, in as far as the proposal to campaign against sanctions. So now we're just purely playing the waiting game here for Andile to finish what he's doing, and then hopefully he joins us. So I'll just quickly check in on him and see how he's doing. Blah, 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 blah. Let's see how we're doing. How are we? How are we doing? Let's just check that. So it's still active there. So he's just sharing it on his profile. So hopefully he joins us soon. Okay, that's great. I'm live now. Please follow. It's not okay for you. Okay, that's great. So we're just waiting for Comrade Mngxitama to join us, and we'll be able to have a discussion. So that's what we're waiting for. We're just waiting for Mngxitama to join us. While I do that, I'll just quickly recognize those who are with us. Good evening, Hilton. Good evening, Chido. Mwanawevu. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you have any questions, please send them through. And also, for those who have interest in joining the Youth League, I have been getting quite a number of personal messages, and equally the group messages have been where people are requesting to find out how you can join Zanu PF. So what I'll quickly do is I will add the link in which you can join Zanu PF onto the chat. Okay, so you can join the party from there. There's a process, a very easy process, very digital. We are a very digital savvy party. Well, me not being one of those who are digital in it. And I'll just quickly send you the link to the registration, so that if you are interested in joining the party, you'll have the link right there for you. Shanaz Sofa, good evening. How are you doing? Thank you for joining us. We're just waiting, for those who are just joining us, we're just waiting for Andile Mngxitama to quickly join us. He disconnected so that he could go onto his Facebook, because we're using a separate app that enables us to have split screens. So he just quickly got out of the app so that he could quickly share it on his personal page. He has done that. Now I'm simply waiting for him to return. And you guys may know that when it comes to time, us Africans are not the best at it. I think Andile is back here now. Andile, are you with us? Okay, I'm just going to add you to the main. There you are. But can you now see me? Or yeah, or is it you just?
I can't see you, but I can hear you. So I'm happy if
okay.
We can. Yeah.
Yeah, but the main page, it appears that people can see us. So I'll just double check if that's okay, and then we'll quickly. I'll start the introduction, and we go on. So Andile, while you were away, I was simply giving people an update on a few political issues that are happening within the UK as they relate to Zimbabwe as well. You would be aware that there are a number of protest movements that are within the UK that are anti-Zanu PF, but equally that are funded by the Westminster Foundation and the NED, and part of those activities is some of the stuff that we're talking about. But we may get into that as we discuss. We don't know how our conversation, which mainly will be geopolitical, will then go into.
Sure.
But anyway, thank you for joining us, Andile Mngxitama. And I'll quickly give an introduction. Andile Mngxitama is a Black consciousness activist, someone who has, for over a decade, I've got to know, as someone who's been passionate about Black consciousness. one who was part of the editing team that wrote the Steve Biko book, Steve Biko Live, if I'm not mistaken. But equally, one of the founding members of the EFF, who then subsequently started his own party based on internal differences, and now the current president of the BLF, which is a black first land first. And today we have the incredible honor of not having just an academic, but someone who is well versed within geopolitical issues that relate to Southern Africa, but more so Africa, and knows how to relate them very well as it in the context of imperialism. Andile Mngxitama, it is great to have you tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, comrade, and also to all the viewers.
Great. Well. Now let's just dive right in. I think as a preamble, it'll be a great way to start. We could discuss some of the things that the many controversies that are surrounding you currently. Now I understand that you're currently fighting a court challenge in the South African courts at the moment. Could you tell us what that particular court issue concerns and what you assume to be the possible outcome?
Yes. Thanks again for inviting me. I must start by acknowledging ZANU-PF as the well-respected liberation movement in the Southern Africa, and those of us who in South Africa have been fighting to return land have been hugely inspired by the struggle of the Zimbabwean people and also the success as far as returning land of the Zimbabwean people is concerned. So we have a deep philosophical, emotional, and ideological attachment to the Zimbabwean struggle. Of course, we take former President Mugabe as the founding father of Black radical nationalism. And we have made comparisons. In fact, if you go online, you'll see I have written a thing where I compared President Mandela and President Mugabe, and I've come out to say that history is likely to view President Mugabe much more favorably than it would our own Nelson Mandela, precisely because under President Mugabe we resolved the colonial question as far as the land question is concerned. And we know that has brought a lot of trouble for Zimbabwe. The West was not going to fold its arms when its kith and kin was losing land that it had stolen from the Zimbabwean people. Now, that is the revolutionary trouble of Zimbabwe. And we'll come back to the contemporary Zimbabwean situation and we have some views. This problem of the West, white people punishing black people for standing up is what has brought our movement, the movement I am president of, Black First, Land First. It is actually a banned organization in South Africa. We are banned. In other words, we are the first political formation since 1994 with so-called democracy that has been basically prescribed by law. We can't participate in elections in South Africa. That is one of the about 7 cases that we are facing. Our slogan, land or death, has been declared hate speech in South Africa. And all these court challenges, attacks, are instigated by the far right wing, white right wing, which represent land thieves in South Africa. They are terrified of our project, which is clear: land or death, land first, black first, return land of black people, and the white establishment can't stomach this. That is why we are banned. Our laws, therefore, our constitution is pro-white. This is the problem of South Africa, which I think the Zimbabweans in some ways have resolved that problem. But the South African laws are pro-white. That is why our party, our movement has been banned, because white extremist right-wing organization said, because we're a blacks-only organization, that is not consistent with the constitution and the law of South Africa. So as I speak to you, we're appealing that decision that says black first, land first has been deregistered as a political party in South Africa. So you are speaking to the president of a banned organization, banned by democracy because we say black first and we say land belongs to black people. And this discourse, this organization is not acceptable to South Africa. We are appealing it. We're educating our people. We are agitating. And we are very clear. I mean, we will not stop because the white establishment says we must stop, or our laws, which are pro-West, are saying we must stop.
So could you quickly help us with the rationale of the courts for banning the entity?
Well, see, we are being banned on the basis of a provision in our Electoral Act that says parties must not discriminate on the basis of race, gender, and so on. And this white-only organization, if you go and you Google Freedom Front Plus, if you Google Freedom Front Plus, just see
you're very much aware
all their leadership. It's like an Ian Smith organization. You know, it's like in Zimbabwe, if you were told by Ian Smith that ZANU-PF cannot exist because it's a black nationalist organization. So they actually went and said that.
But just going to the rationale of the courts, let's put aside the protagonist or those who present the case. Was there any justification? That's it.
Well, they just listened to the argument of our protagonist, our opponents, that says, well, the law says no discrimination in terms of race. Black First, Land First is discriminating in terms of race if it says it's a blacks-only organization. Of course, that is a misrepresentation of the law. That provision was not about stopping black people to struggle for their liberation. That provision was to stop racism. And Black First, Land First is not a racist organization because it's a black organization, because we prescribe to the view that blacks can't be racist. We are black people, victims of racism. So this is really nonsense.
Would your entity, I suppose hypothetically, would your entity accept the membership of white people?
No, we won't. Why would you? Why should?
Does that not then discriminate against race, and they're justifying the court's order?
Well, I mean, let me put it back to you. When Zimbabwe people took land from land thieves in Zimbabwe, they took that land from white people. Was that discrimination, or was that a redress and actually bring about justice? That is what we're doing. We're in a settler colonial society. Where in South Africa,
but the Zimbabwe's context is fundamentally different, because there's a history that buttresses that, which is critical to understand. When Zimbabwe took back its land, it took back its land based on indeed you're correct to suggest that there was a historical redress aspect to it, which was racially driven, right? But that was post a 20-year negotiation process of agitating for a land reform program that was equal, based on the Lancaster House Treaty.
But how is it different
by the British?
How is it different? How is it different?
Party formed. There was no political idea, that a political agenda in the name discriminating against whites. It was purely redressing the historical aspect, but in the intent of sharing.
You took land of white people. If you accept the reasoning, of white people here,
indeed, I accept the
that we can't exist. If you accept the reasoning of white people here, that we can't exist as a black-only organization to redress the colonial problem, then ZANU-PF has no reason. ZANU-PF did not take
composition. ZANU-PF's composition as an entity is multiracial.
But did you take land of black people in Zimbabwe who already had benefited from land, or you took land of white people?
Yes, yeah, we did take land of white people.
That's discrimination, my friend. If I follow your logic, that would be discrimination. Let me just tell you something. Let me just quickly interrupt. Do you know that the SADC tribunal found the Zimbabwean government discriminatory for taking land back? Do you know that? Do you know that?
I recall that.
Exactly.
And we said that they had no jurisdiction.
Exactly. They were using the same logic that they are using against Black First, Land First in South Africa. Do you know that the Zimbabwean government was found guilty for discrimination by the South African Constitutional Court, confirming the decision of the SADC tribunal? Not only that, do you know that we attached the properties of the Zimbabwean government to pay white people who lost property in Zimbabwe?
Yes, correct. That's very
And
true.
you know what was the rationale? That you are being discriminatory by taking land back that belongs to you.
That we were being discriminatory. Yes, it's true.
So we are sitting exactly the same problem.
So you're saying on the basis of that principle, you're disallowed to function as a party as a consequence of wanting to defend. But one could argue that the EFF, which is equally representing the same narrative of agitating for the restoration of Black-owned land, they are not banned. They operate in South Africa. What makes them fundamentally different to your entity?
But are they agitating, or it's a rhetorical device to get votes of Black people? Do you know that EFF has given political power to a party of land or of colonialists, the Democratic Alliance, both in Johannesburg, major metros, Johannesburg, Tshwane, and in fact in Nelson Mandela Bay? They are in alliance, in a political coalition.
But Andile, that same argument can be extended to even the ANC. The ANC has not been banned, has it? Yet they too are agitating for land reform.
Are they? 25 years later, do you know 25 years later in South Africa? Let me just start by saying this. We are 58 million people in South Africa. 10% of the population is white people. Do you know that only 35,000 white people own 80% of South African land? 25 years later, don't tell me about the ANC. The ANC is irrelevant completely when you come to the land question. It is the biggest defenders of land thieves.
But it isn't really irrelevant to this particular question here regarding the naming of a party. Because you have described your philosophy and have alluded that the philosophy is connected to the court's judgment. I'm arguing that the philosophy isn't connected to the court's judgment because there clearly are the parties that exist within that terrain that are equally allowed to operate. Is it not just a mere question that you've titled the name of your party Black First, Land First? That notion is discriminatory in principle. No.
It is shocking that any Black person would say in a Black majority country, we can't name ourselves Black. I mean, this is precisely the reason why we are landless. In South Africa, we are not citizens as Black people. We are not citizens. And we're not even protected by this country does not belong to Black people. That is why when you say Black first, immediately you become illegalized, right? So we're seen as operating outside of the laws and the value system. The value system of South Africa is to put white people first. That is the truth of the matter, and that's what our constitution and laws do. The ANC and EFF are not a threat to white establishment because they are beholden to white project. That is why, as we speak today, both the ANC and EFF in parliament have a two-third majority. They have already agreed in 2017, by the way, to 2018 January to amend the constitution. They did not do so for the whole year. As we speak, there's no amendment, and there will be no amendment of the constitution in South Africa because these two parties are beholden to white interests.
So, okay, this is very interesting. But I think we're getting ahead of ourselves slightly. So let's go back to your judgment of the 21st of August, is it? Right? And there was a postponing of the case. Can you give us, what was the reason behind the postponing of that particular trial, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, I mean, there are, as I say to you, we are facing about 7 or more cases. So there was the reason for COVID.
So one of the cases has already been confirmed. So you are an actually banned entity, as you say.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. So what is the current case that you're facing in the courts right now in South Africa?
There is a case which was postponed recently where white people are saying we were racist because our spokesperson commented on an event where white children were killed by some kind of accident. And he simply said basically that, this is happening every day in Black schools and nobody cares. And they basically, and then there's a case.
They find that to be racist.
Yeah, there's a case that it's got to do with the statement I have made in last December where in response to Johan Rupert is the South African, one of the richest families in South Africa. They own half of South Africa. Johan Rupert has threatened Black people by saying he's got a private militia, he's got a private army, and he would unleash it upon Black people. And I said, speaking on behalf of my organization, that if he were to unleash a Black on Black violence, we will simply defend ourselves by making sure that the white community bleeds as well. And so they then took us to court.
Okay.
Yeah, they took us to court for that. So that was also postponed recently. So there's a number of these sorts of cases against us. But on the banning order, we are appealing this in the electoral court in South Africa in Bloemfontein. We have submitted our papers. We are waiting for court to give directions when the matter would be heard.
Okay, and what is your projection of the outcome?
I don't trust South African courts for nothing. I mean, I don't. South Africa is very strange. We have a justice system which is completely colonial, not just in its composition, but in its jurisprudence and its interpretation of the laws. Not only that, but our own constitution, our foundations of our constitution is Roman Dutch law. It is colonial itself. If you
while I have you on that, while we're on the court situation, I don't want to drift away from our narrative. Perhaps I could get your quick comment on the current public protector numerous court decisions. What is your perception on that?
The public. Let me just go back. South Africa is in a very difficult position. It is as if in Zimbabwe, if Morgan Tsvangirai was to become president, it would have been a situation like this is what we have in South Africa. But Morgan of the ZANU-PF, because you have a pro-neoliberal, neo-colonialist who has captured the ANC, and this is what the public protector has said. The public protector has come with a finding that says the guy who's the president today of South Africa basically bought his way into the presidency of the ANC. We're talking. She says in an investigation, over 400 million was used to contest the ANC position. But there were subsequent email leaks, which shows it's R1 billion we're talking about, just for the ANC conference. Now, ask me, comrade, tell me, comrade, if I were to run for ZANU-PF president and I bring R1 billion, what am I doing with R1 billion? So in South Africa, clearly you buy delegates, you buy your position into becoming the president. This is what has happened.
So Andile, I'll need to just push back for the purposes of plurality. One would push back and say, well, listen, there's no established policy within the ANC that denies delegates or candidates from getting money externally, and that may be a need for the ANC to deal with. But I do understand the perception and the optics thereof. But it's not illegal, is it?
But is it ethically acceptable? Is it not morally reprehensible that I can go take money from what we know? We even know who the money comes from land thieves. These people that we need to take land from are the ones that have sponsored this president. It is shocking. Basically, we have a captured president. No, even if there was no law, but in this instance, in fact, there's been multiple unlawful acts associated with this money laundering questions and so on, right? I mean, today, I'm sure everybody knows, a white man called Gavin Watson has been involved in what people believe is a orchestrated accident. He died. This man was amongst the first who gave money to Ramaphosa campaign through money which comes from corruption and all that goes with that. This man has been murdered from our perspective.
Comrade Andile, would you not then risk being called a conspiracy theorist here? Because you're saying quite a lot of stuff here. But what is the evidence?
The public protector has already ruled on this matter. The public protector has told us.
Yes, I mean, the public protector has told us. But the courts have equally ruled on that matter, and she lost all cases.
No. This matter is still up for review. What they are doing, they have been basically trying to silence her, intimidate her, but not on the main finding. The main finding is still up for review. It's not yet.
So the main finding is still up for review, but the technicalities thereof are still. How about the concealing of the file that the president has requested for?
Yes, that is part of. Yes, I mean, isn't that shocking? That the public Ramaphosa case says that his campaign was clean government, transparency. Now the public protector finds that, actually, no, it is not so transparent. Money was organized in unlawful ways often.
So,
And
Andile,
instead of
if I may play the devil's advocate here, one would argue that you are a known a Zuma apologist.
yes, yes.
Isn't this just you exploiting ANC factionalism and gaining and just purely being an opportunist in with regards to Ramaphosa here?
No, well, but it's for your viewers and other people to evaluate that. We're moving from solid
But what would be your
foundation.
opinion of that if that was to be put to you? So my
No,
duty is to
but
interview.
we make no bones. We make no bones about the fact that we are pro Zuma. We have defended Zuma. We support radical economy transformation. We make no bones about that. We've come out very clear because Zuma has abandoned the neoliberal, neo-colonial project that is driven by the ANC and actually started looking east, just like ZANU-PF under President Mugabe was doing.
Did Zuma abandon? Did Zuma abandon the neoliberalist approach to his politics before the ethical questions were raised or after? And would you not then be seen as a hypocrite to support Zuma in one vein, but also equally not, disregard Ramaphosa in areas where they are equal?
No, I don't know where they are equal. I haven't seen any equality here. There's Zuma. There was a question of Nkandla, remember, and again there he was not involved. It was government people, and then they said he must pay back the money. He paid. Remember, he just paid about 7 million rand. That's it. That's only what.
Are you forgetting the Gupta allegations, for instance? How would you answer that, for instance?
But those allegations were all cooked. There is no court decision. There is no public protector decision that says Zuma got money from the Guptas. The Guptas themselves or their associate, when they have been put in court, in this case, one of the cases, they were let scot-free by the courts, not once, about 3 times. So these speculations on the Zuma aspect of corruption is all speculation, propaganda by white monopoly capital, because they really were scared. Zuma was moving radical black nationalists. Zuma, the first president, was saying South Africa land expropriation without compensation. BRICS must come. IMF, World Bank must go. We must strengthen, the South African economy through redistribution. The mines must go in the hands of black people. Be a state bank.
So, from your view, what went wrong with that project? So clearly there was excitement around that particular issue. Did he lose the support of the ANC?
No, yes. When Zuma said this very late in the day, by the way, that's the first thing.
Yes.
This was a project articulated towards the elective conference.
The elective conference.
Yes. So Zuma was saying radical economic transformation, and so there was these 2 blocks inside the ANC: the neoliberal project of Ramaphosa, New Dawn, basically maintaining the white status quo, and then President Zuma's block, which had radical economic transformation and all these things, land, economy must return. So, and then President Zuma was moving fast at the time. 2 critical things he did. In fact, 3, BRICS, but there was also a mining charter he called. That mining charter that Zuma published said 30% of the mining rights must be given to black people in 12 months. 12 months. And then he announced free education. He was moving very, very fast. Okay.
But Andile, would you deem it practical? If I may quickly interject there, would you have deemed it practical for that to have happened within 12 months, knowing the history of the land?
We are revolutionary.
Its structural aspects, structurally,
we are revolutionary. Yeah, we are revolutionaries. If you ask ZANU-PF at a time when Mugabe just came out of prison, and you said, "Well, will you win this revolution?" In fact, Ian Smith didn't he say that there would be no independence over his dead body?
But it simply isn't the same thing. When ZANU-PF was in government and had the majority, it has tirelessly pushed forward a pro-black agenda. That has been very consistent.
No, yeah, but I'm just answering your question of the practicalities. Is it possible? I'm just saying, as revolutionaries, we have to make the possible impossible.
No, but that isn't my question, is it? My question.
So your question is practical to give us free education in South Africa? Yes.
My question was, would it be feasible, granted the time and the history of that terrain? Did he have the political support and equally the political will from your reading of the ANC? We're not talking about a party that is outside of government. We're talking about a party that is a majority in parliament.
Exactly what happened. Exactly. Your question is correct. What happened is for this radical black nationalist agenda, he was pushed out. So you could argue that he might not have the majority, the required majority to maintain his position.
Impractical.
But now we know it was money. what we're talking about in South Africa today, it is crazy here. You have a president who is in power as a consequence of having bought a conference, and there's solid evidence that shows this. Basically, we are a hostage to a mafia gang of white capital which has bought itself a president. This is in South Africa politics as we speak today. That's what we're facing.
Right. So, okay, wait, this is great, but I think we've slowly diverted from the original context, but it's good that we've explored the different controversial issues that are currently in South Africa. Slowly moving into the geopolitical aspects, which is the crux that we wanted to delve into today. Excuse me. Now, recently, the SADC announced that it would be supporting the anti-sanctions movement in Zimbabwe. And part of that, they've actually declared a day in October in which there would be lobbying against the sanctions on Zimbabwe. Now, let me begin. What is your view on the impact of sanctions, but equally, what is your view on the efficacy of a regional bloc push to lobby the subsequent removal of those sanctions?
Yeah, I think that firstly, all of us who are African nationalists, we must condemn the sanctions against Zimbabwe. And none of our countries, for whatever internal projects they're undertaking, should be faced by international sanctions organized by the West to undermine our internal processes. That's the first very important consideration that we must make. But in terms of what is going on in Zimbabwe, our position is simply this: that SADC must in fact intervene in Zimbabwe. But we do need to find a solution on the Zimbabwean political and economic crisis. And we have said in South Africa, from the South African perspective, my brother, for instance, we are having xenophobia in South Africa. And if you look at the majority of people who come from outside of South Africa who are in South Africa are Zimbabweans. This is precisely because of the economic hardship that Zimbabwean people are facing, and these hardships, we know, a direct consequence of the sanction regime.
I dare ask, why is there a necessity for SADC to intervene in the political and economic situation in a country that is a sovereign internal processes, and equally that is not under crisis? The political aspect is answered by an election solved on that particular date, and equally resolved by virtue of finality by a high court.
Yes, but you see, you can't speak. I'm sure you, as ZANU-PF, you would, but we, as observers from outside, the Zimbabwean elections post Mugabe were very troublesome. There is a serious, in our view, need for Zimbabwean patriots to sit together, irrespective of political party affiliation. In fact, let me go further and say that we are calling for a transitional arrangement in Zimbabwe to normalize the political situation there. Then South Africa has a big responsibility. Let me finish. Big responsibility of bringing financial support to the Zimbabwean economy to also assist in its normalization. So we need a double move. Normalize the politics, but South Africa must take responsibility.
This is double speak, Andile. Because in one vein, you're appreciating the impact of sanctions and the impact thereof that they have in terms of the internal processes. What makes you not think that this is the crisis, the imagined crisis thereof, is not a creation of the very same sanctions you condemn?
For a very long time, we could argue convincingly that this was the case, but I don't think we can sustain that anymore. The crisis in Zimbabwe is a political crisis also. It is not just that we are under sanctions, which is... no. We believe that Zimbabwe cannot continue to go on like this. You have compatriots like Jonathan Moyo in exile. You have people claiming to be in prison. We have seen people being beaten who are protesting. There is a political crisis in Zimbabwe. And what the Zimbabwean nationalists must do, is to sit down and solve this crisis. What we must do as South Africans, in particular, we have to organize a financial support. We need to make sure that we support the Zimbabwean process to normalize the economy. I'm saying it is a responsibility we have as South Africans.
Andile, I'll share with you an example. I'll give you a humble example. You are currently facing an internal challenge within your own party by your former SG. I'm not sure if he's still your Secretary General. And he claims that you are not legitimate. Now, because your SG claims that you're not legitimate, does that then forge or define a crisis within your party, then leading for external intervention as a consequence of internal squabbles within your own party? Would you call that a crisis?
My organization is not facing a crisis. I'm not sitting here with thousands of Zimbabweans leaving Harare, leaving Zimbabwe, coming to South Africa because the economy is collapsing.
But that has been the reality. But that has been the reality.
I'm not sitting with the reality
for a decade. That has been a reality for a decade, and people tend to leave countries that economically are not performing well. But you yourself, in the preamble to your discourse relating to this question that I asked, was you acknowledged the impact of sanctions. Why then won't you acknowledge that the extension to the impact of sanctions creates the internal situation that you see, but at the same time understand that the internal squabbles that you find, like for example the comrades that you cite, Jonathan Moyo, for instance, one of his colleagues, Kasukwere, went into the country, defended himself very well, actually won the case. He could do the same. That does not define a crisis. It merely, and you cannot define a crisis on the basis of what you perceive to be an injustice on one person.
I'm not going to. We have a difficulty. That difficulty is this: that politically we are on the side of the historical party called ZANU-PF of President Mugabe. We are 100% supportive of that. Yeah. Right? We don't, and therefore we don't want to find ourselves necessarily fighting with ZANU-PF, but we do want to call on the patriots of ZANU-PF to recognize, and this is where you will not be able to acknowledge this, that there is an ongoing political crisis in Zimbabwe that needs to be resolved by Zimbabweans. This is our argument. I would agree.
Andile.
I've been looking at the coming out about your last elections, and I'm saying there's nothing. I mean, Chamisa is a young boy. Why don't you? I don't understand why ZANU-PF cannot just simply bring him into government, absorb him, and then sit down as Zimbabweans and stabilize the political system, and then we deal with the serious problem of the economic crisis, which is being, in our view, worsened by the political crisis which is going down in Zimbabwe. We don't see leadership in Zimbabwe. In fact, I'm sorry, I don't see leadership from ZANU-PF. I don't expect leadership from Chamisa. He has not shown me that he's capable of thinking through the crisis that is facing that wonderful country. But we, we do call for Zimbabweans sit down, solve the political problems of Zimbabwe, and stop this IMF World Bank story going to the Commonwealth, going back to colonialism. You have shown us that you are leaders as revolutionary people, but these reversals, talking about giving white people back their land or paying compensation for stolen land, these are reversals which harm the revolutionary process in South Africa. But you can't solve this thing unless the Zimbabweans sit down themselves. And we want to agitate here from South Africa to say we have a responsibility to make serious financial contribution to the normalization of the economy of Zimbabwe. We owe that to Zimbabweans for the contribution you have made to us during our own difficult time.
No, I think it's your sentiments are fair, but equally require quite a lot of substantiation because. For instance, one of the things that you highlight with regards to Nelson Chamisa, for instance, you do acknowledge that we have a democratic process. That democratic process chooses between two people. We cannot then reinvent the wheel as a consequence of bickering that may come from the opposition. That is not how democracy works. No. It works in accordance to what the electoral outcome may be. But granted, we'll differ on this, and I'm willing to accept that we have differences on this. But what I think where we gain commonality is the principle and the philosophy that you allude to, which defines ZANU-PF's ethos, which I would argue still remains a reality. And some of the issues that you highlight simply need a sense of discourse and being able to be as it were, for us to share a set of dialogues as to heighten your sense of awareness as it concerns those particular in-depth issues, especially as it relates to land reform and as well as the internal economic issue. But the question but I suppose the question that hasn't been answered is, in your definition, specifically, what do you see as the impact of sanctions, and do you see the SADC position being helpful in perhaps lobbying their removal?
Yeah, look, it's important that we must call, as a matter of principle, SADC must be very active in calling for the removal of sanctions. But I'm arguing that we must intertwine all those things with the normalization of the political system, political process in Zimbabwe. You can't have Zimbabwean patriots being in exile. You can't have Zimbabwean patriots being jailed. You can't have Zimbabwean patriots feeling like they are not safe at home. You have to really protect them and sit down with them. And I'm saying there's nothing that stops Zimbabwe to have a transitional arrangement which just makes sure that Zimbabwe can defend itself. You can't defend yourself as a divided people, as we see right now.
But
you talk about the democratic process. I don't believe that a lot of us actually accept that the elections that you talk about can be defined, strictly speaking, as a democratic process that express the will of the people, precisely because of the political crisis that you're going through. My argument is simple. There is no fundamental ideological differences in Zimbabwe now that requires the Zimbabwean people to be divided. You're weakening yourself, you're opening yourself up for imperialist attack, and of course, giving South Africa excuses that we shouldn't be making about our contribution to. I don't understand why South Africa is not contributing to normalize Zimbabwe, but we can't do it now without calling for the normalization of politics in Zimbabwe. I mean,
but Andile, I think you find that most of your sessions are rudely highly assumptive, because one aspect is that you must understand that there are fundamental differences in terms of ideology between the MDC and ZANU-PF, because one party requires ZANU-PF is not the one that has gone to the United States Congress and advocated for the implementation of more radical sanctions as a consequence of their differences with ZANU-PF. You cannot use sanctions as a political tool. There should be a sense of collective national interest, which is what's fundamentally lacking. So when you're talking about political differences, these political differences are defined by fundamental differences on national, or what one determines national interest. That does not create a national crisis. It simply means there's a difference of how two political opposing forces understand the national question. To then invite SADC, what would SADC do on a question that's ideological?
No, I mean, but I mean, I don't even believe it's ideological. I'm sorry, I don't see any difference between ideologically. I don't see any difference between ZANU-PF of Comrade Mnangagwa and the MPC. I mean, this ZANU-PF of post Mugabe has been trying to ingratiate itself from the West. I mean, this is the difficulty that I have, that you keep on fighting over what I don't understand anymore. So SADC must fight to end sanctions, but the Zimbabwean people and us as
you're missing the practical. With respect, you're missing the practical aspect that I've suggested to you, which is that when a opposition party, an opposing force, a political force, actively engages a world power to impede on its economic well-being, does that not practically demonstrate an ideological difference?
What is the difference between that and going to the Commonwealth and rejoining the Commonwealth after we had actually pulled out as a consequence of the radical economic project of Zimbabwe, or promising to give money to land thieves whom we had to take land from? Look, I think this.
No, but look at the difference. Look at the difference. You've asked a fundamental question. No, but there is.
There's no substance
But there is, Andile, because the difference between the two items that you have used as examples. For example, requesting to rejoin the Commonwealth vis-a-vis willing to pay land improvements as a matter of goodwill based on the past relationships that we have as a consequence of past farmers willing to engage the government as a matter of goodwill. And then the aspect of the Commonwealth revisiting that aspect.
Zimbabwe has no money to pay. Zimbabwe has no money to pay anybody. Why would you pay land thieves? Why would you give land thieves money?
Well, listen. You don't necessarily close a country because it has no money. It can make those pledges based on future gains. So that is the argument. But that is fundamentally different to going and campaigning actively to impose sanctions that defy the country's ability to grow its own economy.
I think
when you go extending markets is not being colonialist.
No, we must see Chamisa's political and ideological underdevelopment is harmful to Zimbabwe. I mean, this is no.
So then you agree then? That's the only point I'm making.
There's no question about that. There's no question about that. Chamisa's underdevelopment as a nationalist is harmful to the Zimbabwean project. But we have not seen ZANU-PF, which itself has been consistent post-Mugabe on this question. And that is the big problem that we have. But post that, we as South Africans, our interest is to see a Zimbabwe which maintains its position as the leader of the liberation project in the SADC region in Africa, but a Zimbabwe which protects all its citizens and compatriots. I must be open with you, right, and your viewers. I have a very soft spot for Jonathan Moyo personally, because I believe it's a little bit like a Voltaire, it's a little bit like a serious Sartre, of Zimbabwean politics. This man, whatever his other weaknesses, is a compatriot that must be brought into Zimbabwe, protected, and in my view, given responsibility to make sure that a transition to normalization happens and you close ranks as Zimbabweans to defend the Zimbabwean revolution. Right now,
that decision, Comrade Andile, that decision, as it were, when it comes to Jonathan Moyo, is entirely up to him. And it's really entirely up to him coming back to the country and facing up to whatever the challenges may be. And Jonathan Moyo is someone that I would share in that particular sentiment, that there are many compliments that one can share about the person. And in that respect, he knows that home is always best, and he knows just precisely what to do. But an entire country cannot be held at ransom, or rather the assumptive notions of the country cannot be held at ransom on the basis of one individual. This is a nation, and as a consequence, it cannot be held, but it cannot stand still as a consequence of one person's views, the mistreating, or rather the unjustified treatment or lack thereof of one particular individual.
No, but it's that is just symptomatic, That is just symptomatic. I mean, we all remember what happened with the removal of President Mugabe. Some of us are still very unhappy about how President Mugabe was removed. I mean, whatever happened thereafter, and then people's homes were raided by the army, and all that goes with that. Very, very unfortunate developments that has happened in Zimbabwe. What we are saying now, we need a way forward, and a way forward is very simple to us. You normalize the political situation to a transitional arrangement. We as South Africans have to bring in the money, and you have to have, in my view, a blanket amnesty to all political prisoners or political recalcitrants, if you like. Make sure that you protect everybody in Zimbabwe and maintain a radical course as far as the economy.
But allow me to share with you.
Do not go back to the IMF and the World Bank, because if you do that, you will be leading a process here in our country. We have self-interest for Zimbabwe to function as a radical state. It is self-interested, because if you succeed, we will succeed. And we know part of the problem around land in South Africa, our people have been terrorized and told, if you take back the land, you will be like Zimbabwe. So we need Zimbabwe to function so that our political stance on the land question here can be strengthened. So we really need Zimbabwe to function.
Well, Comrade Andile, on that particular notion, we will definitely. I would say in response to that, before I move on to the next subject matter, the aspect of a national transition government is something that has been always bantered around. But people always miss that underlying that particular notion is that there is a constitution that is written as recently by joint players within the political landscape, as recent as 2013. That constitution does not facilitate for such a transition to occur. And the transition to occur ignores the very fundamental ethos of people to be engaged. Who will lead it? What political structures will do that? So it's one of those arguments that have become so old and almost redundant because of the deficiency of democratic practice. But moving forward, one would argue, one would then argue equally that yes, Zimbabwe has political differences, but these political differences, Zimbabweans have found a way. If one is to look at the recommendations made by the Mngxitama report, for instance, those things have been implemented. A national dialogue through an entity called Pollard now is established. It's a voluntary entity that encompasses all opposition forces. That is a platform for any self-loving, self-respecting, patriotic Zimbabwe to come and agitate, including within those particular issues that you're discussing. If they may be issues of people of political differences. These are places where the opposition sets the agenda. There are platforms in Zimbabwe that have been facilitated, that are created to have these discussions. I simply say, to conclude that particular section of our discussion, don't believe the hype. But moving forward, there is a larger geopolitical question to ask. In terms of economic well-being and growth, I mean, you did allude to our relationship with the IMF and so forth. What would you project as someone who's young to be, how do we better increase the intra-trading influences within Africa? Currently, I think our trading infrastructure internally goes below, I think it's 16%, with the external world about 60%. Is that then not an additional impediment to the future of the Pan-African dream that you envision?
If we're just to talk about SADC, Southern Africa, and then maybe just even South Africa and Zimbabwe, our economies are supposed to be better integrated than they are. I mean, I'm shocked when often I hear, at the height of the crisis, that there are no food in Zimbabwean shelves. I mean, I go to Cape Town. I'm in Johannesburg. Cape Town is further than Harare from where I am. So why should Zimbabwe face these sort of strategies when South Africa actually has the capacity to provide them? And then on the other hand, you have your strategic advantage, which is education. A lot of Zimbabweans who are here in South Africa, O levels, A levels, can easily teach in our education schools to help us. We are in serious deep trouble in South Africa in these critical areas of mathematics, physical science, and English. And Zimbabweans have a very solid education there. So we are saying there are things that we can do almost immediately that can ameliorate the crisis, the economic difficulties which are there, how we deal with the question of the border. But all these things cannot happen, unfortunately, until we have resolved the big political questions. And I mean, on our side, we are satisfied in the proposals that we are making. And I can tell you now that we are going to send a letter to the Zimbabwean embassy, in fact, here in South Africa, making precisely these proposals around the transitional government, around the general amnesty, around the question of sitting down, and also on our part, we will be agitating for our government to intervene meaningfully in as far as the normalization of the Zimbabwean situation is concerned.
And I think that
we are tying up those things together. There cannot be normalization of the economy without the normalization of politics.
I equally think that letter will be welcome, purely because the spirit and mood within the country is one of dialogue and reaching out to different opposing opinions. Part of our chief, one of our chief, the chief advisors, the committee, chief advising economists within our finance department, are people within the MDC, for instance. There are many occasions where there are platforms that are created to have this particular dialogue. But we equally understand as a country that this is going to be a process. It's not an event, as it were. But where we'll always differ is to call it a crisis. I think we can fundamentally differ on that, in that particular respect. But however, we do have economic challenges. That goes without saying. But to tie in economic challenges to the political contestation issue, I think is being unaware of the fundamental impact of sanctions and the workings of the very imperialist agenda that you always vehemently argue exists. And I think in this particular instance, you are ignoring it only to favor, perhaps, what may be a suitable argument because of your personal affiliations to one who who differs with the current political existence. But remember that that imperialist agenda does not disappear because Jonathan Moyo or whoever the case may be has disappeared from the country. The regime change agenda, as you would know, has been very clear. They want to get rid of ZANU-PF, not Mugabe, not anyone else. They want to get, it's a regime change agenda. And that is not just about Mugabe. And that agenda has not changed. And I'm sure you are fully aware of it. As you would know the history of Nkrumah, as you would know the history of Sankara, those realities remain fundamentally the same because of what creates our economic reality, isn't it?
No, you see, my brother, we are not going to agree, right? On because we have a periodization of the ideological identity and characterization of ZANU-PF. We have serious difficulty understanding the contemporary ZANU-PF ideological project. Be as it may be, we still think we have a big responsibility to get Zimbabwe to work. If Zimbabwe doesn't work, we will not succeed. Those of us who are interested in addressing the colonial question in South Africa. Over and above that, we can see, you might not see the crisis in Zimbabwe, but we in South Africa know there's a Zimbabwean crisis because every second person we meet at a workplace in these cities is a Zimbabwean who had left Zimbabwe because of the economic hardship, which I, yes, agree, come from the whole attack on Zimbabwe's radical project under President Mugabe. But today, I don't know why Zimbabwe must suffer. Your suffering is no longer consistent, in my view, with the hard black nationalist project that was driven by President Mugabe. Now, don't suffer for nothing. Sit down. There's nothing that stops you. I've heard recently Professor or Dr. Ibo Mandaza making, in my view, sensible suggestions. I hope Zimbabweans are listening to what Ibo Mandaza is saying, and Ibo can still be seen as a compatriot that can make a contribution.
I suppose, Andile, this is where it becomes a bit oxymoronic for me. You cite people like Ibo Mandaza, who, by the way, is an academic who's well respected in his field of academics. However, when it comes to political commentary, historically, his affiliation, his affinity with the international networks that are very much clearly anti-ZANU-PF are not consistent to your notion of anti-imperialism. This is where one would want to look at your notion of imperialism and Pan-Africanism in the sense whereby you present to me people who are clear, who have a track record and who have actually been funded by the NED, and you propose them as the grand solution to a country whose anti-imperialist project.
My brother, I don't share with you the idea that Mnangagwa is an anti-imperialist. He isn't. I mean, you're pandering this idea. This government of ZANU-PF right now is not anti-imperialist whatsoever. But I'm saying to you, you have to listen to all the voices of Zimbabwe. And let me just put it out there, I respect Ibo Mandaza a lot. In the same way I respect the late Professor Sam Moyo, who again, you would make the same case.
Sam Moyo is fundamentally different. He's been very consistent and very pro-African in terms of his funding, even so.
Yeah, I mean, we respect Ibo Mandaza as a Zimbabwean compatriot. I mean, we have big criticism with others, of course, who we know very openly. But I'm saying to you, Zimbabweans, it is a false notion today to claim that there's a fundamental ideological difference between Mnangagwa and Chamisa. There isn't. Of course, Chamisa could stop going to America to call for sanctions. No one should call for sanctions in Zimbabwe. Zimbabweans must sit down, solve their problem. But we can't be beating each other in the streets. We can't be arresting each other. We can't be sending each other to
Andile, you make it seem as if beating each other in the streets is somewhat of a day-to-day occurrence. No, this isn't the norm in Zimbabwe. And anyone who challenges so, it's a fallacy, to say the least. But secondly, if you want to see that our president is actually quite anti-imperialist, simply look at their voting record in the UN. That voting record has still continued. We still remain one of the only a part of two countries without any U.S. military base whatsoever. We may have be engaging, but even if you look at our foreign policy as it were, or as it concerns economics, our thrust is mainly on the global south. Look at all Mnangagwa's visits in terms of foreign outreach. It's been mainly to Euro-Asian markets, which occupy 70% of the global market. That is not, but also tying into people whose ideological perspective, people like countries like Kazakhstan, Russia, China, and so forth, whose ideological perspective is relative to the very colonial issues that we preserve. That does not sound imperialist to me, sir.
We are not going to agree on this question, but I think we agree on the need to move forward. There must be some kind of moving forward, and our argument is that.
I think
ZANU-PF comrades do not accept that there's a crisis in Zimbabwe. It's actually a shocking thing because there is.
I think where we differ, which I think you must get right, what ZANU-PF's position is, because if ZANU-PF didn't agree that there was an economic challenge within the country, they wouldn't then equally call the new agenda a pro-reform agenda and one urging dialogue. You don't urge dialogue if there is nothing to dialogue about. You urge dialogue because there are clearly serious contestations as it comes to our political culture and terrain. So we do agree on the economic aspect of it. But where we differ, perhaps, is in the practical implementation of change and change value. I believe that the democratic ethos of the country should remain the same. And anyone who wants to gain power in the future or in the present should equally retain respect for those same institutions they one day hope to govern. That is where we differ.
No, that's okay, my brother. I mean, I want to find a solution, and I don't think we must be held president.
I think we'll find. But let's go into my final.
Dictates. We must not be held to bureaucratic dictates. We have to be creative. We have to be brave, and I think we must make the hard proposals. Zimbabwe must work. I mean, there's no question about that. Zimbabwe must succeed.
I think we can.
There's no question about that. But it's not going to do those things if we don't deal with these two matters intertwined in an intertwined manner. The politics and the economics of Zimbabwe cannot be disaggregated and resolved one outside the other. These things belong together. Normalize the politics, normalize the economy. And South Africa, we argue very hard, has a role to play in Zimbabwe, and our role is to bring the financial resources that we have to help Zimbabwe out.
And of course, South Africa has its role, and that role primarily has been for us to increase our trading association and our economic alliances, as it were. But I suppose as a final question, you have gone through as a political party, as a young political party, you have been pushing for this, the agenda of land, and the curiosity thereof is that how do you see this playing out in South Africa? The land question. Do you see this ever coming to a sense of finality? And considering that you're a participant in the elections, and of course you were held up in court challenges during the elections, the recent elections in South Africa, and one may cite that as reasoning for your electoral loss. But how do you see this playing out with just the EFF, DA, and ANC, and the absence of your political party that has now been officially banned in South Africa?
Yes, thanks. We are clear that the political parties in parliament, EFF and the ANC as the main black parties, do not have the appetite to address the land question. And this is precisely because of the elections having heavily sponsored by the same land thieves. This is the problem. So the ANC and EFF have been tamed as political parties, and the absence of Black First, Land First in Parliament provides them with a large scope for maneuver to delay, to deceive, to mislead our people. So as far as the parliamentary processes are concerned to address the land question, the prospects are very dim. We don't see that happening. It's not possible. These parties.
But you say this about the EFF, but yet you are a founding member of the EFF. What changed?
They changed. They decided to abandon their founding principles and decide to become a petty bourgeois political party with radical nationalist rhetoric.
But one would argue that so far they've been able to push an agenda. The reasons why there's even an argument regarding constitutional reform or the constitutional amendment as it relates to land reform is as a consequence of the agitations of the EFF. Would you not agree?
I mean, there's big discussion in South Africa in these two ways. It's EFF, but also you must see how Zuma actually changed his language. I mean, his last State of the Nation address was absolutely radical black nationalist. So there is a rhetorical shift towards the left in general in South Africa, towards black radical nationalism. But when you must look at the rhetoric and look at the actions, you can't say
as EFF contributed to that particular shift.
Of course,
in terms of paradigm
in South Africa, of course, in South Africa today, if you want to be taken seriously, you're gonna have to sound radical, right? Now, but what do you do in actual fact? You can't say to me you want a land redistribution, but then go to a political coalition with land thieves. I mean, this is not consistent. You go to London to meet the imperialists, but you say you are Marxist-Leninists. It doesn't make sense. You can't be funded.
But Andile, there is no actual evidence that Malema met any London imperialist, as it were, apart from attending Oxford, the Oxford Union, and debating within the Oxford Union and having regular meetings amongst the London private investors who wanted to rally to understand where the EFF's position was in terms of what the future plans were. But to term that to be apologist to that particular group purely because out of engaging would be to equally label any revolutionary who sat down with someone they oppose as someone who's anti-imperialist. Is that not fundamentally incorrect? And there's no evidence to suggest that.
No. The London meeting, I mean, that one at the university is different from the Chatham House meeting with Lord Robin Renwick.
Yes.
And a number of British imperialists.
But Chatham House as an institution is a research-based institution. So what negates Malema from having such a meeting with no matter who that person may be? What evidence do you have to substantiate your claim that he became somewhat
Chatham House is not a research institute. It's an imperialist research institute. Imperialist. And Robin Renwick.
Research institute.
Absolutely. Robin Renwick, we know him. He was in Zimbabwe during the negotiations. They sent him to Namibia. He was in South Africa. He's the man who changed Nelson Mandela's position on nationalization, and he's proud of it. If you go Google, is there on YouTube. He says it. Robin Renwick. Now let me just finish. Let me tell you what the evidence. He writes in his book. Listen. Robin Renwick has written a book about South Africa, and he writes in his book that the meeting was asked for. The EFF is the one that asked for the meeting with him. That's what he writes in the book. And not only that, he says in this book, in my engagement with the EFF, it was clear to me that they are not serious about nationalization of banks and the mines. This is what he says in his book, right? Now, they have not come out and said Robin Renwick is lying. They have not come out and said they will sue him. They have not contradicted what he says. And our argument is, why would you meet Robin Renwick anyway? And by the way, immediately after meeting Renwick, they started attacking President Mugabe. They attacked Nelson Mandela, something they've never done before. And then when they came back home, they formed a coalition with a party of racists and land thieves. I mean, what more evidence do you want?
Okay. So based on that submission, you would argue that, okay, great, they have lost their way. So why do they still agitate for land reform then, if that is indeed the case?
Because that is how you get votes from landless people in South Africa. You say to them, we're going to give you jobs, we're going to give you land, and these poor people
makes you different? You. So the question would be, what makes you different then, as PLF?
We have not sold out. We will not sell out.
You don't have power yet to sell out. Once you get power, what stops you from becoming the EFF that you are a founding member of?
Well, that is speculation, my friend. But I can assure you, we are not for sale. If we were for sale, we would have long time ago done it. We're a poor organization. We don't have resources. We're refusing money from imperialism. So, I mean, we are.
Oops, we've lost Mngxitama there. Well, we've lost Mngxitama there. Hello? Baba Mngxitama. Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. We're going back. We're going back live. Sorry, we just lost Mngxitama. Welcome back, Mngxitama. Go ahead.
Yes, my brother. And yes, please, we'll have to stop the broadcast because I have
know,
people.
but
Yes.
that I'm looking for. But Baba Mngxitama, thank you so much for coming on, and I really enjoyed this robust engagement and this dialogue. And I think it's important that both our countries, young people in particular, to continue to have this engagement. What are your parting words, sir, before you go?
No, I mean, I'm saying that let's do the Chimurenga. Let's bring our countries together much better. Let's resolve both the political and economic crises that, in fact, we are also having a crisis in South Africa, a political and an economic crisis. You know, I mean, our unemployment is going completely crazy. We have not addressed all the big questions that we need to address. And now we are sitting with a president who is illegitimate. So we have a crisis ourselves. And so let's see.
Well, yeah, but thank you yet again, Mr. Mngxitama, and I look forward to doing this again soon. To our viewers, I really thank you all for joining in and for being a part of this discussion. I look forward to further engagements as we discuss more. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you.
What's in scope here?